The state of Ohio has banned cities from implementing rent control laws. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have good news for landlords in the state of Ohio. Now, as I've said before, Ohio has been known to be a landlord-friendly place. It's a great place to invest, in my opinion. And honestly, if it wasn't for like high taxes, I probably would already be investing there. I'm an out-of-state investor, so I don't mind looking at markets like, Cleveland or Cincinnati or Columbus and saying, hey, maybe there's some good deals here. And, from what I've seen, real estate prices in Ohio are relatively low. Even though Ohio doesn't have the fastest growth rate, there still is a need for a lot of rental property. So if you are out of state, in my opinion, you should definitely look at Ohio. Now, especially since they passed this law. This law will prohibit cities and municipalities from passing their own little rent control laws. Now, a lot of states, they already have a law like this on the books, and Ohio apparently did not have that sort of law. But, they took preemptive action to make sure that it didn't happen. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below and let me know, does your state have a law that prohibits rent control? And if it does, what do you think of that? Do you think it's a good idea, or do you think it's a bad idea? I ask this question all the time because oddly enough, a lot of tenants and, pro-tenant, anti-landlord people still watch my videos. So get your opinion out there and I'll rip it apart, or maybe I'll bring it up in one of my comment videos. And after the video today, I'll read one of the comments from one of the people who watched my video as well. So hang in there for that. It'll be an interesting one. So this article is coming from Cincinnati.com, and it says, Ohio cities won't be allowed to impose rent control under law signed by Governor Mike DeWine. Yeah, they're doing good. They're doing good work up there in Ohio. So let's get into it. Ohio cities will be blocked from imposing rent control measures on landlords under a bill signed into law by Governor Mike DeWine on Friday. House Bill 430 started out as a natural gas line regulation measure, but was amended to include a mechanism to preempt local rent control efforts. It was backed by landlords and bankers. Rent control is government-enforced restrictions on how much landlords can charge. And there's a reason why not just landlords, but bankers as well got behind the measure. Because when they are lending money out, right, they have to make sure that the properties they're lending to are credit worthy. They're able to pay the loans back that they're giving. And if they're not, and in the case of a lot of rent control properties, it is very difficult for the banks to make their money back, for the numbers to work. So they stood to lose a lot of money if a rent control measure is put into place. I understand that, right? People today who don't understand the financing of real estate, they don't understand how all of this works. They seem to live in fantasy land where they don't even ask questions about, hey, why are we doing things this way? Why do you insist that? If you ask some basic questions to a landlord, a real estate investor, a mortgage broker, etc., then you would get clear answers. But instead, they want to put these policies in place without getting input from one of the largest stakeholders. Anyway, let's keep going. In April, a group began circulating petitions to put an initiative on the ballot in Columbus that calls for rent control and licensing landlords. An official at the Ohio Municipal League said that is the only rent control effort underway in the state. Ohio already prohibits cities and townships from adopting laws that regulate rental agreements. The Ohio Constitution, adopted in 1912, grants municipalities home rule powers as long as local ordinances don't conflict with the state's general laws, but lawmakers have passed measures to preempt local government action on plastic bag fees to traffic cameras. So yeah, basically what the law is saying is, hey, the state, not the local, little jurisdiction. The state is the one who creates the rental laws, okay? And if a rent control law is to pass in the state, it needs to pass through the legislator. You're not going to have your little fiefdom here in the city of Columbus or in some, small town somewhere saying, well, here we're going to have rent control. No, that's not going to happen, okay? You cannot take people's property rights away just because you think that you deserve that sort of power. And that's exactly what the state is telling these cities and municipalities where they're trying to pass these ridiculous laws. Okay. Senator Rob McCauley, a Republican from Napoleon, said rent control leads to a reduction in housing supply and makes it harder for lower income tenants to find affordable places to live. Every other place this has been done in the country has resulted in disastrous consequences, he told his fellow senators. And he's absolutely right. Now, obviously, the rent control people, they don't look at these places where rent control is implemented and see the failures. Why? Because they are blinded by their passion and their vision of the socialist future, okay? They don't look and see, well, these rent control properties sure are in bad shape. Why aren't they doing any repairs to them? Oh man, these rent control properties haven't been updated in 40 years. That sure is weird. Wow, it sure is hard to even rent a rent control property because these tenants never move. So all the new people to town, they end up stuck, without a place that's rent control. They don't see that. It's kind of odd how they completely ignore that fact. They also ignore the fact that the number of rent controlled units is just steadily decreasing as time passes. Okay? Why? Because nobody's bringing new rent controlled units online. Why would they? That's stupid. Okay, if you can't make money off of it, then there's no incentive for you to build it or create new, and there's actually an incentive for landlords to get out of the business. Now, no, the landlords aren't going to immediately shut their properties down, but over 20 to 30 years, you might see, 10, 15, 20% reduction in the number of housing units in that city because of a rent control policy. Yeah, you can look at places like New York and San Francisco and you can see the steady decline in the number of rent-controlled units within those cities. It is ridiculous because the landlords are getting out of the business. They're converting their units over to condos or they're selling them as co-ops or whatever, but they're doing whatever it takes to make sure that, hey, we don't have to comply with these ridiculous rent control rules. So yeah, good on Ohio for passing this. Rent control is not a solution to poverty or inequality. It instead restricts the supply of housing and transfers wealth to current renters at the expense of future and market rate renters, said Vina Jones-Cox, director of the Community of Real Estate Entrepreneurs, in written testimony on the bill. The American Legislative Exchange Council, a free market think tank backed by business interests, has had a model bill for preempting rent control since 2013. Yeah, and they bring up some good points. I'm glad that the politicians there in Ohio were listening to the real estate investors, listening to the landlords, listening to those people who actually provide housing. Because if they hadn't, then those people who are providing housing, you think Ohio is an island? It's not. Okay, there's states completely surrounding it where there are no rent control measures. Okay, there's places all over the country where investors will take their money where they could actually get a return on it instead of investing in Ohio. And, Ohio is struggling with slower growth. The Rust Belt in general is struggling with slower growth and, slightly declining populations. The last thing they need is for businesses and developers and people who are trying to bring money into the state to be scared away by ridiculous legislation that does not even do the thing that they want it to do, which is provide more affordable housing to the people who need it. So yeah, this is a good thing for the state of Ohio, and I'm glad that the governor went ahead and signed it, and let's hope that other states pass similar legislation. So I'm going to be reading one of the comments from my comment section now, and this comment is actually coming from my video, A Small Landlord Opposes Being Forced to Pay Tenants' Unpaid Utility Debts. And it was, basically a small landlord in Missoula, Montana. Missoula, Montana recently had passed legislation that said, hey, now landlords are responsible for the unpaid utility debts of tenants. And you know how I feel about that. It's a bunch of garbage. But anyway, let's read this comment. I'm going to be a little facetious and say, oh no, the landlord might find it better to sell the homes to families who will live in them instead of use them for income. Society has too much rent seeking. heading toward the we will own nothing and be happy economy. And that's coming from a user called Beef410. And listen, this is what I say right here, okay? There will always be a need for rental housing, regardless of what you think, okay? Now, I have always promoted home ownership for, people. I've always thought to myself, hey, the best option for people is to save up the money for a down payment until they can actually purchase their own home. And if they live in a very expensive area where housing is extremely expensive, my suggestion is to leave that area. Okay, if you aren't afforded the opportunity to be a homeowner, a property owner where you're living, if you live in a place like New York or whatever, rather than sit there and argue and deal with landlords, if you hate landlords so much, you should seek out a place where you can afford to buy a home and move there. Okay, go where you're treated the best. That's from Andrew Henderson, the nomad capitalist, right? And that's what I've done. I've lived in several different large cities throughout this country, and I go where I'm treated the best. And that includes as a real estate investor. I only invest in places where I'm treated well. I won't invest my money anywhere where there's ridiculous laws. So, you being mad at the landlords for, going out, investing our money, and then providing housing for those who choose to rent and need to rent, there's nothing wrong with what we're doing. The reason that you think it's wrong is because you don't like the fact that, hey, some people might be doing better financially than you where they can actually afford real estate. Well, you know what? A lot of landlords, they're like me, okay? They didn't start off with some big, huge sum of money. They didn't start off with a ton of properties and, tons of cash and all that. No. I tell everybody, from the time I was 20 until the time I was 27 years old, I was an overnight stalker at Walmart, okay? And then finally, I got myself a decent job at AT&T. Then the 2008 recession hit, and guess what? I'm unemployed for 6 months, okay? I went into all sorts of debt. I had credit card debt, car loan debt, student loan debt, etc. I was in a horrible financial situation. Darn near lost the place where I was living. That's how bad off I was, okay? Just, making nothing at that point. And then finally, I stood up and I was like, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm going to work my butt off and do whatever it takes to get myself out of this situation. So I went down to the state prison, a job that I did not want, okay? You're up there and you're working with, the worst of the worst in society when you're in a prison guard. And that's exactly what I did. But they offered, just a stable, not even a high pay. I remember when I started, I was getting paid $11 an hour. This was in 2009, okay? I'm working for $11 an hour in this place. People were getting stabbed and, all sorts of crazy stuff. But I worked my butt off. I worked as much overtime as I could. And then I moved from the state prison over to the federal prison. Then I moved from the federal prison over to becoming a federal agent, and then slowly I built myself up and, I saved my money. I worked hard, as much overtime as I could so that I could pay off all of my debts, get my credit fixed. And then finally, I saved up a chunk of cash enough so I could buy my first rental property. And ever since then, I said, hey, guess what? Real estate is the way to go. It is what an average person like me, just a Walmart stalker for 7 years, can finally get something that, and I don't know anybody. I don't have anything special about me. I didn't inherit any money, but I had to go through all of that in order to get where I am right now. And so I get frustrated as heck when people say, oh, you're just a greedy landlord, you're just rent seeking or whatever, okay? So, maybe you should actually talk to some of these landlords, hear their stories, hear where they came from, see what they did. When I was first buying rental properties, I'm in the property living in my rental, okay? I'm doing the repairs myself, the management myself. Whenever a toilet needed to be fixed, I'm over there myself. You act like all landlords are greedy and don't do anything and sit on the beach and just drink martini, whatever, okay? I know that's not the truth. The other landlords on here know that's not the truth. And simply put, we will never stop fighting for our rights, for our property rights, okay?